Well, in session 1, we covered the context and significance of the Genesis flood. In session 2, we're going to be taking a look at the big picture. Many Christians have a hard time kind of visualizing what was going on during the flood, and when you give too many scientific details, you can't really slot the pieces in the proper spots. So with that in mind, let's jump right into it. Session 2, the big picture.
Author and international speaker Jay Seegert holds degrees in both physics and engineering technology. As founder of the Starting Point Project, Jay passionately seeks to help people establish a biblical worldview based on the authority of Scripture. For the past 35 years, he has been graciously tackling tough questions regarding the Christian faith, especially in the often intimidating world of science, bringing it down to a level that everyone can understand. We trust you will enjoy this Creation versus Evolution series as Jay delivers a fascinating talk entitled The Genesis Flood. This Changes Everything, Part 2.
Well, thanks for coming back. Hope you enjoyed session number 1 of the Genesis Flood. This changes everything. We are going to be moving into session number 2, which is the big picture. Big picture is very important with this because a lot of times, no matter what the subject is, you start hearing all these really cool details, but you don't really know where to slot them in, and you don't know their significance because you lost the big picture. You go through like a big thick book on Old Testament, history or whatever. By the time you get to the end, you don't really know the big picture because there's just too much detail along the way. So we're going to cover the big picture before jumping into the actual scientific evidence. And part of that means covering some misconceptions about the Genesis flood. I picked out just a few to cover very quickly before we move on. Number 1, about it rained 40 days and 40 nights. Is that what happened or not? Now, a lot of people think, okay, so you got the earth, apparently it starts raining, and then that floods the earth for 40 days and 40 nights, and then it stops raining and the sun comes out and it kind of clears up. It doesn't sound very believable. You want to tell someone, yeah, it rained 40 days and 40 nights, flooded the earth. That's crazy. It is crazy. That's physically impossible. It would not flood the earth raining 40 days and 40 nights. The Bible doesn't say it only rained 40 days and 40 nights. It does refer to that initial period, but it doesn't say then that's all there was. So we need to understand, yeah, it did rain for 40 days and 40 nights, but there was a lot more going on, and we'll be getting into that. Another thing, no rain before the flood. It never rained before the flood. So when the flood came and started raining, they were shocked because they had never seen rain before. Why would we say that? Well, Genesis 2:5 says, and the Lord God had not caused it to rain upon the earth, and there was not a man to till the ground. See, it says he didn't cause it to rain. There wasn't any rain before the flood. What's the context here? The context is the creation account. Genesis chapter 2, God creates everything. He creates the garden. He had not created Adam and Eve yet, and he had not caused it to rain at that point. There was a mist that came up that watered everything. This has nothing to do with whether it never rained or not before the flood. Anytime after that, 1,600 years or so. Did it rain before the flood? We don't know. Most likely, there was probably some rain, probably not torrential rain or anything, but there was probably some just because of how the physics of atmosphere works and all that. But you can't be dogmatic and say, oh, it never rained before the flood. The Bible doesn't say that. And then the ark. We are focused on the flood here and not necessarily the whole story of the ark and all the details, but I want to cover just a little bit. The ark did not look like that. For example, we know for a fact the roof wasn't red, it was dark green. And the plank wasn't light green, it was light blue. That's what the ark looked like. Obviously the ark, no, it didn't look like that at all. It was a massive structure, 510 feet long, 85 feet wide, and 51 feet high. This thing was massive. So we need to be careful when we're teaching, especially in Sunday school and kindergartens and all the little pictures that we use about the ark. Storage space was equal to 450 semi-trailers. That's a lot. If we compare that to the Eiffel Tower, it'd be almost 4 Eiffel Towers high. That's a lot of storage space. I would not want to be the guy who's got to load the ones on the top there. I'm afraid of heights, so it wouldn't be good for me. Obviously, it didn't work that way, but a lot of storage space. So we don't want to depict the ark that way. It is fun for kids, and they can play with the little models, and churches who do that, they're kind of innocently doing that, but they're doing some damage because eventually The kids here, there was never a flood. Yeah, how did Noah get all those animals on the ark? That couldn't have happened. They realize, oh yeah, it doesn't make any sense. And then if we come along later, oh yeah, no, okay, we know it didn't happen that way. Okay, so what you taught me, it wasn't really true. It's really something else. Well, maybe the Jesus stuff wasn't true either. So we need to be very careful of how we teach the Bible. You couldn't fit millions of species on that ark. It's impossible. You know how many millions and millions of species of animals are on this planet? They wouldn't fit on the ark. The Bible doesn't say that Noah took two of each species. That's a modern word that scientists can't even decide on exactly what it means. It's a whole nother talk. The Bible says two of each kind of animal were on the ark. So we have major kinds of animals that Noah took two of each kind. God brought them to him. And if you take a look at the wolves there in the middle, all scientists today believe that every breed of dog has descended from a wolf-like creature. Well, that's evolution, right? No, not at all. You can breed wolves and select things out, some naturally and in human intervention, all that, and you can end up producing all these breeds of dogs. But you can take Dalmatians, purebred Dalmatians, and breed them until you're blue in the face. You're never going to get the wolf back. They can produce a variety of animals, but you get the variety by getting rid of genetic information. You're not adding new information to get it, which evolution would require. You're actually shuffling and getting rid of stuff that can naturally produce a variety. God created creatures to reproduce after that kind. So you put wolves on the ark, and you get all these modern dogs today. There's a lot of great genetics behind that. Just like, Indian elephants, African elephants, mammoths, mastodons, they're the same kind of animal. So no need to take all these on there. You need to take a single kind that could produce all that. Now today we know that the mastodons and mammoths have gone extinct, but we still have Indian and African elephants around. So how many animals were actually on the ark? You do all the calculations here, about 1,400 kinds of animals for a total of probably less than 7,000. Wait a minute. 1,400 kinds, two of each kind, that's 2,800, right? The Bible also says that Noah took 7 of some of the kinds of the clean animals. So you do all those calculations, you come up with something under 7,000 animals. That's not millions and millions of species that were needed. It's fascinating when you look at the details. Yeah, but they're too big. You couldn't fit all those animals in the ark just because they're big. Well, the average size of an animal on the ark was smaller than a medium-sized dog. Most of them were much smaller than a medium-sized dog. And even the big ones, you take them when they're smaller, when they're younger. You don't want to take the big full-grown ones that come off the ark and say, okay, be fruitful, multiply. And they're like, well, I'm too old for this. And why do we have you on the ark? So you take even the big ones, you take them when they're younger. It makes sense. How about dinosaurs on the ark? Okay, it's crazy enough talking about the flood to begin with, right? You're not going to tell me there were dinosaurs on the ark. I have an entire 3-part series on dinosaurs in the Bible that's fascinating, and we talk about when they were created, when they existed, what they were like. Would they have been around at the time of the flood? What happened to them? Long story short, most of them were wiped out in the flood, but there actually would have been 2 of each kind on the ark. God didn't say, take 2 of each kind of animals on the ark. Oh, except for those dinosaurs. I mean, God, forget them. No, 2 of each kind. And God brought them to Noah. There's a lot of detail behind that, but we go through more of that in our DVD on dinosaurs. How about no rainbow before the flood, right? Because, the rainbow, that was God's promise. So there couldn't have been rainbows before the flood. Well, what does the Bible say again about this? We have to always go back. What does it actually say? Genesis 9:13. I do set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a token of a covenant between me and the earth. God didn't say, hey, now I'm creating a rainbow you've never seen before, and this is what it means. He's referring to it. They probably had seen a rainbow before, maybe not quite as big, but they had seen it because of physics. But now God is saying, when you see that in the future, this is going to be a reminder, I'm not doing this again. So we can't say there was never a rainbow before the flood. There probably was. The idea of Pangaea, most of you have probably heard of Pangaea. The idea that the earth used to be like one massive continent that was then subsequently broken up into the continents we have today. When I first heard that, probably grade school, junior high, I thought, well, that's not true because I believe the Bible. Well, I've matured a lot since then, and I realize I think this is true. I think there's a lot of scientific evidence for this. I think it's more than a coincidence that those continents seem to fit together fairly well as a puzzle, and I think the Bible supports it as well. Some people even talk about Rodinia. Probably haven't even heard of that one. That was a configuration some people think existed even before Pangaea. Not as much evidence for that, so we'll probably just stick with Pangaea. But here's why, biblically, I think it makes sense too, in addition to all the science. Genesis 1:9, and God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear, and it was so. It says, let the dry land appear. It's singular in the Hebrew, yabosh. You guys didn't know I was a Hebrew expert, did you? I didn't know that either. I just looked it up and put it in my PowerPoint. But it's important to know, what does the text say? The Hebrew word seems to indicate, I want to be dogmatic, but it seems to indicate one large landmass in the original creation with seas around it. So I think that supports this idea that there was one large continent that was broken up catastrophically during the flood. Now, part of my background is that I was invited to be on the board of directors of Logos Research Associates. It's a consortium of some of the world's leading scientists who are Christians. In fact, it's the largest body on the planet of scientists who are Christians and creationists. I got invited to be on the board about 7 or 8 years ago. The founding member is Dr. John Sanford, who was from Cornell University. He's retired from there now, but he invented something called the gene gun. It inserts genes into the DNA. Worldwide famous for that. Very godly man, but very humble. Just a great guy. And there's Dr. John Baumgartner. He's a PhD geophysicist. He's built the world's best 3D computer simulation of plate tectonics. Just off the charts, brilliant. And then there's one other guy on the board that I'll talk about maybe later. But plate tectonics, that's why I bring this up right now. Dr. John Baumgartner built this computer model showing how plate tectonics work, and even a lot of secular scientists use this model. And his model actually shows how these plates, once they start moving, they can be moving up to meters per second. Plates of the earth moving meters per second. That is catastrophic. So we've got some, plates. You've probably seen some of these diagrams before. And the fountains of the deep here, the Bible says that's how the flood started. It wasn't, it just started raining. The fountains of the deep are broken up. Water from within the earth coming out, shooting up into the atmosphere, then subsequently coming back down for 40 days and for 40 nights. And we see this in the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, going down through the middle of the Atlantic. That's why they call it the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, buried deep in the ocean. But it pops its head out up in Iceland. You can actually see it sticking out of the ground if you go to Iceland, which I'm hoping to get there next year. There's the Mid-Atlantic Ridge with those plates ripped apart. Now picture them being ripped apart in the beginning of the flood and magma coming up, superheating the water and shooting it up in jets into the atmosphere, and then coming back down as torrential rains for 40 days and 40 nights all the way around the earth. That's very catastrophic. There's a lot of action going on during that time. And you got United States and various mountain ranges, Sierra Nevadas, Cascades, Rockies, Appalachians. A lot of those were formed by the plate tectonics, plates colliding with each other, folding things up and forming those mountain ranges. Then you picture the Rockies, the majestic, mountains out west. And then you think about the Appalachian Mountains, rolling hills and wood and all, very different. Why do they look so different? Because the Appalachian Mountains were formed earlier in the flood, and there was a lot of erosion happening after that, whereas the Rockies formed very late in the flood, and you had no subsequent erosion going on, so they're very jagged in their formation. It's very fascinating when you look at all the details. So what triggered the flood? What started it? Nobody knows. I don't know. We have different ideas. The Bible doesn't tell us what actually started it. We know the first thing that happened was the breaking up the fountains of the deep, but what caused that to happen, we don't know. There are different thoughts and ideas and possibilities. All we can do is come up with models of guessing what happened. It's not important to actually know. We know it was a miraculous event. Some people think it was an asteroid that came and hit the earth, which triggered things, and that is a possibility. That may have happened. The earth has been hit by many, many asteroids over the years. Here's one in Arizona that's close to where we go on our Grand Canyon tours. 2/3 of a mile in diameter and 560 feet deep. That's a big asteroid impact. But there's a much bigger one in South Australia. This one is 56 miles wide. They think the asteroid that hit that was about 2.5 miles wide itself. And it was equal to 50,000 to 100,000 atomic bombs going off. So that would do a lot of damage, and that could certainly trigger something. But the biggest one we've discovered is in southern tip of Africa here. This thing is 190 miles across. That is a big asteroid hitting the earth. So that could certainly trigger something. And when you think about an egg, its shell is 1/100th of an inch thick. It's not very thick, but it's hard enough to, to do what it needs to do. If you were to shrink the earth down to the size of an egg, and don't do this when you get home, but its shell, the crust, would only be 1/1000th of an inch thick. So an eggshell is 10 times thicker than what the earth shell would be if they were the same size. So it's not hard to envision that being broken up when it gets impacted. So was the flood triggered by an asteroid impact? Might be. Maybe God miraculously caused the timing of that. Whatever it was initiated by God, whether he just miraculously did something or he caused some physical event to trigger the flood. So that was like the mid-Atlantic ridge there. Now we're going to move over to some other plate action going on here. It's called subduction, where one plate slides underneath another. So we have plate A going underneath plate B. And this is how this diagram works. Plate A is going to start sliding under plate B. And when it does, it starts to drag the tip of B with it, starts to pull it down because of friction. Then it goes farther, and it starts to build up even more tension with plate B that's being bent down. And then it goes even farther, and eventually, and remember, these plates are under the ocean, they're underwater. Eventually, it snaps up, plate B, and it pushes all that water. That's a tsunami. And in 2011, you probably remember there was a phenomenal tsunami in Japan. March 11th, a magnitude 9 earthquake struck Japan. So you got an earthquake going, causing this tsunami action in the water. There were multiple tsunamis with waves up to 128 feet. They surged 6 miles inland. 217 square miles of land were completely flooded. More than 16,000 people died. Waves reached as far as Alaska, Hawaii, and Chile, and they were still 6.5 feet high, going across the ocean, still 6 feet high. That's a big tsunami. Did a lot of damage. It's the only video clip that I had, and this isn't even the worst damage, but the water's coming into the land there, and afterwards leaves a lot of devastation in its wake. That's just one tsunami going off in one place. Imagine this happening all around the planet. So back to our diagram here. We also know something that happened. The ocean floors were raised up about a mile higher than they are today. Even secular scientists talk about that. They know in the past the ocean floors were raised up. What's going to happen? It's going to push all the ocean water onto the land. You'd have a global flood going on. And when we break the flood down, we can break it down into what we call 6 major mega sequence, 6 events that are happening during the year-long flood. It wasn't that it just rained and flooded the earth. It wasn't that just water splashed up from the oceans and went off and it was done. There were 6 major events that even secular scientists talk about, these major mega sequences. So we're going to go through each one really quickly here. So we got the geologic column on the left, all the layers in the earth. That's a fact. There are layers in the earth. They've given them names. They give ages for hundreds of millions of years, all that. We'll ignore the dates on there for right now, but the layers are there in that order. And then on the right side, we see these mega sequences, which were named after Indian tribes. So we have the Sauk mega sequence. You go out to Devil's Lake, that's Sauk County. This is the Sauk mega sequence. Then we have the Tippecanoe, Kaskaskia, Absaroka. We have the Zuni, and the last one is the Tejas. So 6 of these major events coming and going that we'll describe here. The first one is the Sauk megasequence. It was initiated by the great fountains of the deep, Genesis 7:11, and that's when the plate tectonics began. Mainly pre-flood shallow seas are being buried here, marine creatures. It's hard to envision, but when you're picturing the United States right now, and you're thinking, okay, the waters came from the ocean. Actually, the United States would have been a lot of shallow seas on the edges, even closer towards the middle. Some dry land, but a lot of it was shallow seas. So when the flood starts, ocean water is coming into the shallow seas and bringing sea creatures in there and burying them. So people on dry land, they don't even know anything's happening yet. That's the first phase of the flood. So it's just marine creatures being buried. And when we look at like the Grand Canyon here and all the layers, which we'll talk more about later, the first 3 set of sedimentary layers that are laid down by water are here. They were brought in by the Sauk megasequence. Below that, we have some of the original creation rock, the Zoroaster granite and the Vishnu schist. That's part of the original creation rock. And then after that, the flood started and all these sediments are being laid down. So the first megasequence comes and lays down these first 3 layers, which we have the Tapete sandstones, the Bright Angel shale, and the Muav limestone. When you think a jar, you could put some sediments in there, water, and shake it up, and then it settles out, and it layers itself, doesn't it? Probably all seen that in school or maybe done that yourself. The larger grains settle out first at the bottom, and then the next and the next. That's what we have with the Tapete sandstones. Those are larger grains, so you get that laid down first. So as one event is coming in, the water's bringing all these jumbled up sediments, and it kind of slows down the water, and then it's going to go back out. When it slows down, the sediments start to drop out. You get sandstone at the bottom. Then the Bright Angel Shale, the Muave limestone, that's calcium carbonate, so that lasts on the top. Then when the waters go out, they actually take some of those sediments with them, just like on the beach. Brings in some sand, and then it takes them out again. So it brings in, lays these layers down, goes out, takes maybe some of that with it. Second mega sequence, the Tippecanoe. It's similar to the Sauk sequence, but it encroached a little bit further on land. Humans probably started to notice the water, but virtually no land or plants being buried yet, sea creatures. So at this point, someone living might say, hey, anybody notice the water that kind of coming closer to us, or is it just me? They're starting to see that, but they're probably not panicking yet. The third mega sequence, Kaskaskia, similar to the Sauk and Tippecanoe, but encroached further and produced slightly thicker sediments, still virtually no land or plants being buried. Again, just the sea creatures being buried, but getting further and further onto land. Most likely still within the initial 40 days that the Bible talks about. And the ark was probably still on the ground at that point. So, Noah and his family are in the ark, but they're still just sitting there. Then we have the fourth mega sequence, Absarica. Houston, we have liftoff. This is when the Bible tells us the ark actually lifted off the ground. So there's obviously a lot more water coming here to actually lift the ark off the ground. The waters encroached much further onto land, depositing much greater volumes of sediments than the previous mega sequences. The first fossils of land and animals and plants were being buried in these layers produced by this mega sequence. So it's coming up further, and it's affecting the plants and the animals now. The Zuni mega sequence. If you were having a bad day, it just got a lot worse here. This is the pinnacle of the flood. All land was covered, and all land creatures died at this point in the flood. It's probably days 100 to about 150 in Scripture. Maximum plate tectonic action going on here. New ocean floors rising that we talked about, aiding in the waters completely flooding the land. And then the last mega sequence, Tejas. The waters began to recede from days 150 and onward. Ocean floors starting to cool and lowering again, aided in the water being able to come off the land and go back into the oceans. That's the short answer. Where did the water go after the flood? Went back into the oceans. You had coffee this morning or bottled water, you're drinking flood water. That's where most of it went. Some of it actually went under the layers of the earth. I can't get into that right now. There's evidence of water flowing actually now in a different direction towards the west coast because of plate movements and things like that. The Grand Canyon possibly formed during this time. So you got all these sequences coming and going. Now this is the last one that came, and it's starting to go out again now. And some people think that's when the Grand Canyon was carved. So all those sequences coming in are putting all those layers down. So if you picture the Grand Canyon filled in, you can see the layers on the edge. Just picture it's just all filled in. And now the last sequence is going out, and as it goes out, it's catastrophically carving out those soft sediments in a very short period of time. There's another view on how the Grand Canyon was carved, one I like better. I don't know that it's true. I just like it because I can explain it. I can visualize it more. That doesn't mean it's true, but it's called the breached dam. This would be after the flood. So the flood lays all the sediments down, everything's filled in with Grand Canyon. Could be a few hundred years later, something happens, which I'll describe here, of what may have carved that canyon, also in a short period of time. So we have in the darker area here the Grand Canyon area. I'm going to move that into the pink there, and you will notice two lakes here in the bigger view, Grand Lake and Hopi Lake. They don't exist today, but many people think they did after the flood. Water's going off the land. There's going to be pockets of water, sitting, remaining, plus with, rivers and rain and all that that's still going on a little bit, and maybe some ice melting from the Ice Age. It's a whole other story. The Ice Age happened just after the flood. All that could have started filling these lakes up even more until they were breached. And so we're going to look at this yellow area here where Grand Lake, they think, was breached first, so the water starts flowing through there, which causes Hopi Lake to breach, and that whole thing, they think Grand Lake might have had 3 times as much water as Lake Michigan has. All of a sudden, catastrophically, in a few days, flowing out there, going through the soft sediments, and carving it out in a very short period of time. So that's that idea. We're going to zoom in on that little area where the breach was. This is a Google Earth picture. This is what it looks like right now. Kind of looks like a backyard. Somebody you haven't planted the grass yet, and the hose is running and washes things out. You can see something was washed out here catastrophically. And as all those sediments are removed, that's a lot of weight. So that allows the land to rise a little bit and make that crack. Any leftover water would just start flowing through the crack. The Colorado River is an afterthought. It didn't carve the canyon. It was flowing there afterwards. And just a little side note, I give Grand Canyon tours. When we go on the raft, the second day we're actually on the river. We actually set in at Lake Powell, and this is Glen Canyon Dam. This is what it looks like, and we set in there at the bottom. It's a really cool trip that we go on. We actually end up taking a 2-mile tunnel with a bus to get down there, and then we come out and then walk down under the raft, so you're not rappelling to get down there or anything. It's a really easy trip, and it's a lot of fun, and this dam is just beautiful. So we come out at the bottom and then get on the river there, and it's fascinating. And we end up going around the famous Horseshoe Bend here, which you've probably seen pictures of. So we're actually on rafts just floating around there, and all along the way we give these scientific lectures saying that, yes, there was a Genesis flood. It happened just like the Bible said. So when we come out, from start at Lake Powell, go through the river, Horseshoe Bend, and come out at Lee's Ferry. And when we come out, we see cliffs off to the right that are the Vermilion Cliffs, and off to the left we see Echo Cliffs, and the rest there is all washed out. To put some of this in perspective now, we have that Grand Canyon I've been showing you pictures of, and you've seen these diagrams before. And at the bottom, about a mile down, you got the Colorado River. I'm going to mirror this so it looks more like a complete canyon there, and then shrink this down. There's the Grand Canyon in the shaded area there. That's the canyon that you picture and see all the time. You can see just to the right of that, there are some layers, and they seem to kind of start to curve down. If you extend that and follow that, they keep curving way down, and you got a lot of extra layers on top of all that. It's called the Grand Staircase, like stair steps of extra layers that you don't see at the Grand Canyon, but they're to the north of there. One of the first most significant layers there is the Vermilion Cliffs that I mentioned. That's the kind of the start of the Grand Staircase. Then we have the White Cliffs, which are part of Zion Canyon, which you may have heard of. Some of you may have even been there. It's beautiful, 2,300 feet deep. It's a massive canyon, Navajo sandstone. Then the next stair step that's significant would be the Pink Cliffs of Bryce Canyon, beautiful canyon. The structures are called hoodoos. It's really strange. It's evidence of catastrophic erosion. It goes through fast, erodes everything else. The harder parts are still there. If this was there for millions of years, these things would be all broken off and fallen over. But it was carved catastrophically only a few thousand years ago. So that was the Grand Staircase. Now, if you take that Grand Canyon and put it up against the geologic column that we talk about, it takes up about maybe half of that whole thing. The Grand Staircase takes up maybe about a third of it. The remaining layers mostly are layers that have happened after the flood. Subsequently, there's some local things that have made some of those layers, but that kind of puts everything into perspective here. What most people don't know is when you go to the Grand Canyon, this is the South Rim, we actually go there and we walk around, there are railings, it's actually a safe trip. When you're standing on the South Rim looking 1 mile down to the Colorado River, most people don't realize there used to be another 1.5 miles of sediments above where you're standing. How do we know that? It's the Grand Staircase we just looked at. They exist to the north of the canyon, but they've been washed out at the canyon. The Colorado River, sitting a mile down, did not carve out 1.5 miles of sediments above the top of the canyon. It's physically impossible. How do we know that they were here in the past? There are still remnants. You got Red Butte and Cedar Mountain that are in that area. Those are part of the layers of the Grand Staircase. The rest has been washed out. They used to be there. Even a lot of the guides that work there, they're not aware of this, and they can't explain it unless there was actually a global flood. Here's an interesting admission about how old the Grand Canyon is. It says the Grand Canyon, this is from geology.com, secular source. The Grand Canyon is one of the most recognizable landforms on the planet, and most often asked question about it is, when did it form? If only there was a simple answer. Geologists still debate many of the details about the origin and the age of the canyon. Basin spillover is currently receiving a lot of attention, that breached dam that I told you about. They naturally wondered what caused the rapid arrival of water on these basins. How did that water get there? It's like, well, I have an idea. We may never know, but that is part of the beauty of this marvelous place. It's a mystery, isn't it? It's like, I don't think it's so mysterious. I think the Bible has a lot to say about that if they would just pay attention to it. So, how did it form? Don't know. When did it form? Don't know. But it did form. They at least know that, but just missing some of the biggest details that they just can't answer. Famous quote, there are none so blind as those who will not see. And the Bible says in Jeremiah chapter 5, hear now this, O foolish people, without understanding, which have eyes and see not, which have ears and hear not. The evidence is all around them. Some of them just don't want to see it because it goes against their worldview. They don't like the consequences that come along with that, so they work so hard to contort themselves and to jump through hoops to explain it some other way other than the straightforward from what we see and from what we read, especially in Scripture. Another quote from Irish geographer. He said, surely what we know as geohistory originates not within the rocks, but within the minds of their human observers. As the creation of a human intellect, our geohistories may owe more than is commonly supposed to processes acting within our own cerebra, our brains. It's like we're kind of making this up rather than what we're actually seeing. So that was the big picture. We went through that really fast. But instead of just it rained for 40 days and 40 nights and the water kind of came up and then it went away and like that's the flood. No, that would be a silly story. The Bible doesn't support it. Science doesn't support that. We need to have a bigger understanding. Massive action going on, plate tectonic activity, fountains of the great deep breaking up, water going up in the atmosphere, flooding the planet, breaking the continents apart catastrophically in a very short period of time, and then eventually settling down to where they are today. And it would actually cause an ice age after that, which would be another talk that we're not getting into right now. But you have a little bit better picture of the flood and what actually happened rather than the silly stories that we kind of come up with and maybe even teach our own kids, which have to then correct in the future. And so in session number 3, we're finally getting into what most of you probably came for, the scientific evidence. We'll be taking a look at that in a great amount of detail. Won't go too deep. It'll be understandable. It'll be fascinating, though. The more we look at science, the more it backs up what God's Word has been telling us all along. So thanks for being here for session number 2. We will see you for session number 3.
We hope you enjoyed this presentation and trust it was an encouragement to you. For more information about our ministry and resources, visit us online at thestartingpointproject.com.